Dejo que entre la gente. Muy buenos días. Good morning. Bon
Good
dia.
morning. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the launching of Mapping of the Presence, Lands and Territories of Afro-descendant peoples in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is Omaira Bolaños talking, the director of the Latin American program of the Rights and Resources Initiative, RRI, and today I will be with you facilitating this meeting. The map that we are launching today is the first cartographic tool that visualizes population data of Afro-descendant peoples, their territories, and the overlapping with decisive systems for the regulation of climate change and conservation of diversity. This map tool has been done in 16 countries around Latin America, and we have identified so far 145.8 million hectares of lands that are being managed by Afro-descendant communities, areas in which they live and that are of capital importance for the life and for the preservation as culture. We also identify 5 strategic ecosystems in those territories that have a presence of Afro-descendants. These strategic systems are wetlands, moist forests, savannas, mangroves, and dry forests. All these ecosystems are an integral part of the territories and of the material sustenance of Afro-descendant peoples. That's how this map that we're going to present today shows the importance of the recognition and protection of territorial rights of Afro-descendant peoples and communities as an effective measure to protect those strategic ecosystems. In the same way, the information that we're going to show today shows the importance of Afro-descendant peoples as a crucial player in national, regional, and global discussions on climate change and conservation. The creation of this tool and this analysis has been a collective endeavor for a long time, and is the result of a roadmap that was established in a joint way by the Afro-descendant people in order to promote the recognition and the enjoyment of their territorial rights and of the representation as a separate voice in the national consensus. I would like to highlight the participation of the Afro-descendant movement in all these 16 countries and the grassroots associations that have contributed to the collection and analysis of the data that we're going to present today. In the same way, I would like to highlight the leadership of the Black communities process in Colombia, of the Observatory of Ethnic and Peasant Territories, and from the Universidad Javeriana of Colombia and of the RRI. You are all welcome. Now I have the honor to pass the mic to Jose Luis Rentifo, who was the coordinator of the Black Communities process, has led this movement together with the Afro-descendant movement in the region. Jose Luis, please go ahead. Good morning, Omaira. Thank you so much for this introduction. Thank you, all of you, for your participation at this event that is so important. And like Omaira was saying, it has become for us in a very important tool. As I would like to thank RRI for this process, this follow-up process that they have been doing in regards of this process, so that now we can have this tool, as well as the observatory, OTEC, which has become a very important pillar for the putting together, the gathering of the data, as well as all the organizations of Afro-descendant leaders, men and women, who during this whole process have shown their will so that each of the data that today we're going to present will become really a relevant instrument. After this, I would like to point out that since the beginning, when we thought about how do we identify and how do we see ourselves on a regional level as Black peoples, and today we can identify that we have a tool, and that this tool, a tool that we didn't have, and I would like to point out that with the help of the RRI and the observatory and the social organization, we're able to think about what was the instrument that can lead us to building a roadmap and a working instrument in order to visibilize the fight of Black people in Latin America and the Caribbean. Maybe we haven't covered every single scenario, but we have done every effort in order to achieve that. So here we are, Omaira. We would like to continue, and I believe that this is the best scenario. You are all welcome to this meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Omaira. Thank you so much, Jose Luis. Now I have the honor of introducing Joana Herrera and Elias Elo, who are going to present the viewer. Joana Herrera is the director of Ethnic and Peasant Territories Observatory at the Universidad Javeriana. She has been a researcher in systems for natural resources in the Pacific and the Caribbean coast, together with ethnic groups and peasant communities. He is the director of rural development at the School of Regional Studies. She has a master in cultural studies. And we'll also introduce Elias Elo, who together with Joanna is going to present the viewer. He is a researcher and coordinator at the OTEC in the Universidad Javeriana. He's a specialist in geographical information systems, and especially in the analysis of map information with an emphasis in geographical and participative representations. Joanna and Elias, please go ahead. Thank you so much, Omaira, for this presentation. And thank you to the RRI and to the Black Communities process and all the organizations that have contributed to build this cartographic viewer that we are presenting today. For the observatory, it's a real honor to be a technical partner in this process. We have been called to build this information system. And today we have the opportunity, together with my colleague Elias, to tell you about some of the results and to present what will be this tool which we're going to continue developing. I'm going to share my screen with you in order to show you some of the data that we consider more relevant in the research, especially because it's a research to organize data that were dispersed in different countries. The most important characteristics of the viewer is that it's an open system where you can consult and download data. We have a regional scale of the 16 countries that have been prioritized for this study. It's going to be progressive, as I said, and one of these most important characteristics is the way that we collect the information in a collaborative way through organizations to corroborate or validate data sets that may be subject to discussion, like census data that come from the self-recognition. We are mapping the presence of Afro-descendant peoples, and in some countries, this presence can be documented through national census, through census that the organizations themselves have organized, and in other countries like Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, Nicaragua, this presence corresponds to the recognized lands, to the areas that have already been delimited through the titling processes. And the way that these data are there, the diversity of data is a real challenge when we want to analyze in the viewer the different layers of information. There is also the information on ecosystems, coverage, because the tool wants to be a comprehensive instrument regarding these territories, a descriptive territory in climate discussions that are going to come.
Nacionales, las características.
So even though census are subject to discussion, but the characteristics of self-recognition or ethnicity, as far as ethnicity and identity, allows us to configure different areas, especially in those places where there is no recognition of collective tenure, where there are no territorial rights that are consolidated. So this source is very interesting. So from the beginning, you have heard about the countries in Central and Mesoamerica. You can see them there. It's 7 in Central America and 9 countries in South America that are listed there on the slide. And aside from that, we have a first categorization, which is very interesting, beyond natural borders, in the same way that we do with indigenous peoples, the Afro-descendant people. The distribution of Afro-descendants goes beyond national borders, especially in Central America, where there are different occupations in the coastal areas, in the Caribbean too. It happens in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, and there is also an Amazon language, and is especially important in Brazil, Suriname, and Colombia, especially, and also in Andean regions, in dry corridors, and the different ecosystems that Omaira already described, and different sustainable models that are very much related to the right of tenure and territorial rights. Here, you will be able to identify the presence of Afro-descendant peoples in certain polygons or territories that show you where they are located, the information, the statistical information, the scenarios of climate change, and the ecosystem coverage. So before we go into the viewer, let's look at some of these significant data. Omaira already told us almost 145 million hectares that we have delimited that overlap ecosystems and protected areas that have a lot of biodiversity and that can contribute a lot to climate regulation. Here we can see the percentages in countries like Panama, Belize, Honduras, Costa Rica, in tropical moist forests. In most of these countries, it's 50%. Guatemala is almost 50%. these are the most interesting coverage as far as ecosystems that are sensitive to climate change. But we also know their importance as far as regulation. And the same thing happens with other ecosystems. We can go into much detail now, but we will see that in the viewer. These are the maps that come out from the viewer. But the interesting thing about the map tool is that those are dynamic maps. Now we are going to see how we can put the different categories, the fact of having protected areas today finally overlapping with the areas where there is a presence of Afro-descendant communities. And this allows us to do stats about this overlapping, about the topology of the distance between the areas and the territories, and for sure about the relationship. The same thing for conservation as far as coverage. And in this tool, we have analyzed marine and coastal. So 13 out of these 16 countries are in coastal areas, and an area where there are mangroves, where there are forests with seafaring peoples, fishers that are very important for the Afro-descendants people. So Elias is going to introduce the viewer to us. Thank you so much, Joanna. For everyone that is here in this space, I would like to explain how we build and how we systematize the information in this viewer, which is a dynamic viewer that can be updated. For sure, it needs data, it needs information, it needs figures. So it has been a tremendous effort of systematizing the information from the different countries that have participated in the study, from the institutions that produce information in each of these countries in 5 main components regarding statistical information, climate change, ecosystem and protected areas, Afro-descendant communities, and extractive activities. And this is something that is not done. We will continue developing this within this project. But I would like to highlight that a lot of the information came out from the organizations and Afro-descendant peoples in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have used new tools like geographical forms. We have interviews all these peoples. We have collected information that they have shared. Without that, it would have been impossible to build all these maps. So I'm going to show you the access to this platform. We have a page that you can go in. It's called mig.etnoterritorios.org, so that you can go into the information territories. But there is this one that's called Presencia Afro-Latinoamericana, Afro-descendant presence. So when you load the map, it's going to show you all the map information.
En esos 5 grandes ejes temáticos,
We've mainly divided in these 5 great themes: the Afro settlements, areas protected, and climate change areas. Each of these groups you can deploy or have in this drop-down menu, and we have an information that we've collected by country. And as Joanna mentioned, we've achieved in some places to locate geographical points of settlements. And I'd like to perhaps show you the case of Paraguay, where we have 3 different locations, urban locations, which are Emboscada, Cambacoco, and Cambacué. We've been able to locate these geographical points. And as we have in blue, political and administrative locations that can be districts, provinces, depending on the way in which countries are organized. And you can basically add the layers of any of the countries that are interested you to see where the information is and where we found those places, be it settlements or people, or sorry, these settlements identified by these points, or the territories identified by each state. As a second layer of information, we have the different census. These have arisen from an exercise of acknowledgement and mapping. And the statistic information that these organizations have, let me just refresh the page. So in relation to these census, we can also access, interact and, for example, activate all those layers in relation to senses that we've been able to identify in this study. What's most interesting about these layers is that we can also carry out queries. For example, I'd like to go to the Pacific area of Panama and Colombia and Ecuador. For example, I'd like to know the different characteristics of these units. Then we can consult this information by just clicking on these categories, analytical categories. I apologize. I think my internet connection is a bit slow right when I'm just showing you, so information is not properly loading. But what I want to say is that this systematization process can be consulted. I will just consult Colombia, given that my internet connection is a bit poor, and we can therefore view information on this specific map. Other layers of this mapping information has to do with the information that we have in climate change scenarios. These climate change scenarios can be consulted as of the information, for example, the increase of the sea level. And these are studies that have been built with the intergovernmental panels of climate change, where we can learn much more deeper what are those specific scenarios. And perhaps if we can put it in a certain wording, perhaps are more negative in relation to the information that we've been able to consult from all these different platforms. And these scenarios will certainly allow us to learn what are those most vulnerable areas in climate change, and what are those areas that perhaps we must pay a special attention to, specifically in all these different international scenarios in relation to climate change. Finally, there are other layers of information that have to do with coverage and land use. Coverage and land use obviously provide a landscape of what are the characteristics currently available in terms of the preservation of these ecosystems. I apologize. I think the platform has a technical error, but I will continue explaining the different characteristics. A very important topic is that this platform allows us to basically print maps. It allows us to create maps that aren't necessarily so easy to access to with other tools, because national and international viewers currently available are not so user-friendly. However, our platform seeks to facilitate access to these type of data. So now I will go to the backup system we have for our platform. I apologize that it's not working well. We have a technical error, so just give me 1 second and I'll share it. Are you seeing my screen, Joanna? Yes, I can see your screen. Okay, so surely it's because we are currently have lots of access or user access at the same time to a platform. That is might be why we had this technical error. But this, back to talking about these census layers. So this has been fed by all the information that we have gathered from all countries, and we also have coverage layers that, as I just previously mentioned, allow us to also learn what are the specific characteristics in terms of ecosystems. Also, climate change layers allow us to do queries on what are those specific locations that can be most affected by climate change. All this under the scope of all the data that we've been able to collect in terms of location. The platform, as you've seen, can be accessed to by this URL, make.etnoterritorios.org. And perhaps when we don't have so much technical errors, we invite you to access it. And I would just like to close by mentioning that, or highlighting some of the tools that are available, and these have to do with map printing. For example, I want to show you the case of Ecuador. We can therefore print what are the ecosystemic characteristics in the different identified territories, those are specifically in red for this case. And for this, we can use the printing tool. This tool is this icon right here that I'm clicking on the left-hand side. And you can use different templates, also adjust the scales of the maps, and also choose the different printing formats. This takes a bit of time, as long as this is an automatic creation of the map. And then the outcome is an outcome file, perhaps the one that you're seeing on my screen now. And this is how this outcome format or document will look like. This is therefore graphic information, and this may be used in other scenarios where, for example, this is key for decision-making processes. An important element, and an element with which I'd like to conclude the presentation of this platform, is that, well, we are currently carrying out queries exercises in terms of what are the characteristics that might affect these territories in relation to climate change. And for this, we've used scenarios that the Intergovernmental Panel have provided. All these layers can be consulted in the platform, and these will present those scenarios. I would just like to show you the scenario that we've found most complex, that has to do with the ethno and coastal areas that can be affected by these climate change effects. And these areas pointed out in red are the ones that have been most under threat because of drought. In the case of Brazil, for example, in Central America and Venezuela, we have Afro-descendant settlements in territories or areas that of greater environmental complexities. I will now close over this, and I'd like to invite you to continue consulting this platform. We will, due to the amount of users that are surely accessing the platform right now, we will have some technical errors, but perhaps at a later point in time, you can consult the platform. So that's all from me. Thank you. Thank you very much, Joanna and Elias. I think it is quite important and very thrilling as well to see this map, and also the interest of all participants to enter the platform and consult it. I think this is a very valuable tool for all of us. After this presentation, we'd like to hand the floor to the following panelists who are part of the Afro-descendant movement that has participated in this work since the beginning. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Osvaldo Bilbao, Executive Director of the Ethnical Development Center, or SEDET by its acronym in Spanish in Peru. Osvaldo is a specialist in social development for Afro-descendant communities, and he's worked since many years ago in favor of the rights of Afro-descendant communities and peoples in Peru at an international level. So Osvaldo, we have a question for you. Perhaps you can share your reflection around this work and what it represents. Now, taking into account the identified trends in the study that has just been presented, what opinion can you give from the perspective of Afro peoples and Afro women in Latin America and in the Caribbean in relation to the status of the acknowledgement of the human rights and territorial rights in the region, perhaps making emphasis on the barriers of access and perhaps what differentiated impacts this topic has on women specifically. So welcome, Osvaldo. Good morning, everyone. I'd firstly like to thank RRI for this great opportunity, and I'd like to greet all colleagues here online in the session. So in relation to your question, I think we can determine through the work that has been carried out the following. In some countries of the region, we see more advance in the constitutional or legal acknowledgement of Afro-Colombian populations, such as the case of Brazil. It's important, therefore, to see the amount of resolutions that are included also in the national constitution. On the other hand, there are many other countries such as Honduras, Mexico, Bolivia, or Colombia, just to mention some, that have a specific regulation on collective rights. Among those, for example, we have regimes of community land tenure, such as the case of Colombia with the ICT regulation. But we also see that there are very, very few countries that target an applicability of acknowledgement to land due to the lack of legal vehicles or measures. Despite the fact that there are regulation frameworks, it has these documents or articles or bills have not really true been implemented, and therefore this results in, for example, limitations such as free transit or the use or commercialization of hydric or forest services of their communities. Paradoxically, this problem exists in the states where there's constitutional rights, and I think this is a very important to highlight. Although it's true that there is a constitutional acknowledgement for the case of Brazil, for example, or Colombia, there are still all these restrictions to, for example, free transit. In the case of Colombia, for example, the internal war, well, there are certain elements so that block the free transit of Afro-Colombian population. And the use of water, for example, is limited also because the state has certain restrictions. Also, there are other countries where the constitutional acknowledgement of Afro-descendant populations in terms of regulation and community land tenure rights is absolutely none. In the case of, for example, Uruguay, in Honduras and Paraguay, sorry. In the case of Paraguay, because these are taken into account as urban communities. But for example, for the case of the year 1998, according to an intendant resolution, 5.5 hectares were appointed to the Combacua community, and up to date, they have not been able to access it. And in Peru, this is not yet regulated. Although most countries have a regulation that can guarantee the exercise of the rights of women, it's the specific regulation for Afro-descendant women is practically none. There is quite a robust framework, such as the one in Brazil or Colombia, on, for example, women in terms of equity, but on Afro-descendant women, there is almost no regulation. In that same sense, there is no observation, for example, in collective tenure rights at a community level. According to the study, there is a possibility to have this community tenure for women. So I do think that we would need to start perhaps pointing out some of the challenges that we face. Give me 1 second. Some challenges that we deem important, well, as a main challenge, we want to highlight, for example, broadening investigation on the current situation of rights, of collective rights of Afro-descendant peoples, as well as providing technical assistance to governmental entities and civil society organizations. One of the things that we found most impacting is the very little capacity of civil society to really advocate for everything related to the territories. I think we need to start to develop strategies so that we can start working with civil society organizations so that they can have skills to develop skills so that they can start defending the territories. And in terms of intergovernmental realm, I think this is a bit more difficult because we also need political will. On the other hand, we believe that we need to drive regulation and the implementation of all these different tools available because it is through the political advocacy work that this should be done. And I would also consider important and in relation to the document that has just been presented, and I formally request to the University de Javeriana to create a dissemination effort so that this study can be presented in different activities. For example, we have certain spaces that can be important, such as, for example, the permanent forum of the Afro-descendant peoples from the 5th to the 8th of December. And I think we have collected important points and a huge challenge before us. And this is a challenge that, firstly, well, point out to the fact that we need to create collective strategies in a joint manner and for the Afro-descendant peoples to be able to drive strategies, not only national strategies, but also seek global strategies. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Osvaldo.
Thank you very much, Osvaldo.
Damos ahora la palabra
Now we'll
a
hand the floor
Jiménez,
to
quien es
Gregoria
presidenta
Jimenez.
de la
She is the
organización
president of the
Étnico-Comunitaria
Ethnic Community
ODECO
Organization, or
y
ODECO by its
ella viene
acronym in
desarrollando
Spanish,
trabajo para
from
el
Honduras,
desarrollo
and
de
she's
las
been
poblaciones
developing
indígenas
work for
afrodescendientes
the
y garífunas en el país como
comprehensive
oportunidad de
development
procesos de
of
desarrollo en todos los
Honduras,
territorios del
Afro-descendant
país.
peoples,
Gregoria,
and they've advanced work
bienvenida.
and
Bueno,
territorial
pues una
work. So
pregunta
Gregoria,
rápida.
welcome, and we have a question
Gregoria
for you.
muestra
This
una
is the following.
importante
Mapping
presencia
indicates an important presence of
afrodescendiente
the
en
Afro-descendant
las zonas
peoples in
costeras
the coastal areas of Mesoamerica, very rich areas in biodiversity, however vulnerable in relation to climate change. These are shared conflicts by Afro-Latin communities that exist in other scenarios. So the question is the following. What are the main challenges in the Mesoamerican region for the protection of tenure rights and its acknowledgement and recognition in discussions of climate and the political realm? Thank you very much, Omaira, and thank you also to RRI, and of course to my Afro-Colombian brothers from the PCN, or Territorial and Natural Resources team, to talk about this topic that concerns us all, and a topic in which we've been able to progress to a certain extent, as Osvaldo just mentioned, at a Latin American level. Well, in Honduras, and I think that this is perhaps a regional topic, as we share main challenges, this is very much related to what my brother Osvaldo has just mentioned. In my opinion, the first challenge, and the one that is most cross-cutting for this issue, is the lack of political will of our states to be able to provide timely responses to all these different problems that are arising, and to show or reflect this. In our case in Honduras, we haven't really achieved the government to be accountable for specific actions, or either ratifying, for example, the 169 agreement of the ITO. Because we agree if this step would have been taken, many of the problems that we currently have would not be a reality, or would not be a problem, a current problem in our community. So it's this lack of political will from our states, and the fact that this invisibilizes many times the work that we've been able to carry out. And this certainly does not take into account all these different inputs that we already have, and this experience that we have in relation to community territories that we have here in Honduras. Another main challenge, which I also think is common to all Latin America, is persecution to the advocates in territories. We currently have persecutions, threats, and there have even been deaths in relation to advocate work of territorial rights of the Garifuna peoples in Honduras. And this has certainly not been covered in the most expedite manner by the entities that should do this type of work, in this case in Honduras. Some years ago, actually, I think now it's been 5 years since the death of a group of young people that were kidnapped in a community, and authorities give absolutely no response in relation to these events. So I think this is a topic that we need to continue approaching to obtain responses in a timely manner.
Another topic that came out in all this process that was done by the university is in regards to how vulnerable we are right now, the communities, Afro-descendant communities, and in particular in Honduras, but then also in Guatemala, Nicaragua. There were some catastrophic results after the hurricane that passed recently through Central America and in other countries of the world. So I believe that this is a big challenge that we have, and we need to continue making progress with this, climate change as well. As mentioned in the summary that you sent us, there have been crops that have been lost, that our brothers that work in agriculture have suffered from that when there are these consequences of climate change. And there is food insecurity, and we believe that the effort should be done by the states. And I would like to mention again the challenge, which in my view is the bigger one, which is the lack of political will, because there has not been an adequate response to face everything that is happening in our communities in regards to climate change. And as this research points out, many of our communities are located in areas where the state should intervene because those are protected areas. For instance, we have here communities in places that are not appropriate, but there is not a proper response by the state. So this is the biggest challenge that we have, the lack of political will on the part of our national states. So thank you so much for inviting us, and we are at your disposal to help contributing to this international work that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Gregoria. Gracias por todos sus
Thank you so much, Gregoria. Thank you for all your comments. Those are very important in order to understand the territorial aspects of what we are seeing on the map. Now I would like to invite Jose Absalon Suarez from the Territories and Natural Resources team of PCN, Black Communities Process in Colombia. He's an activist for the environment and tenure rights. He has been supporting collective titling processes, and he has also helped with the social mapping. So Jose Absalon, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Omaira. It's a real pleasure to be here and participate in this important panel regarding these topics that are so important for our communities. In regards to your question and recognizing this important work that has been done, I would like to highlight 5 different points in regards to the question that you asked me. The first one is that the international community should recognize and give its due importance to Afro-descendant peoples in Latin America. We are covering over 145 million hectares of territories. That's a very relevant piece of information. Aside from that, Afro-descendant peoples is more than 110 million people. We are pretty much 20% of the population in the area. This means that the presence of Afro-descendants in the region is very important as far as territories, as far as population, because of what we mean. But another important element is that we have an harmonious relationship with those territories where we live, those 145 million hectares. Biodiversity, yes. We believe that it has been kept alive because of the relationship of how Afro-descendant peoples have had this relation with the environment, using the essential knowledge from our forefathers that came from Africa, and then also what we learn in the region. And this knowledge and this relationship with the territories have allowed for this biodiversity that we have right now, and those full ecosystems that we have and fully functioning ecosystems. One of the most important function is the capture, the sequestration of CO2 in our territories, in one of the most important ecosystems, which is the mangroves. So this relationship, these more than 100 million people have kept in these 145 million hectares of territory has been thanks to this harmonious relationship that we have kept with the territories. And that's why this region has this biodiversity and those strategic ecosystems. And this population needs to continue delivering these services so that the global population, not just Afro-descendants, will be able to enjoy these natural those natural resources. That's why Afro-descendant peoples are relevant and are important on a global level. Number three is that the quality of life of this population depends on the quality of those territories and ecosystems. If those ecosystems and these territories are lost, it will deepen the poverty and the displacement of those people, because the quality of life depends on the preservation of those ecosystems and territories. So it's very important to understand that the existence of Afro-descendants in the region depends on the quality of the territories. So if we keep going in depth regarding the impact of climate change, and if biodiversity continues to be lost, we will be displaced from our territories. So it's important to understand that the quality of life depends on this relationship that needs to be kept. But then also, since we are most vulnerable populations to climate change and the risk of disaster, we all know, like the viewers show, that we are populating coastal areas where the effects of climate change will be felt in a much stronger way. So we are a population that is much more vulnerable to these impacts, and it motivates us to be relevant in these discussions that are happening. And I would like to point out also a topic that was pointed out by my preceding colleague, and it has to do with the disappearing and the killing of social and environmental leaders in the region. This is also a topic where Afro-descendant peoples are suffering because of the situation. So the fact that the leaders that defend the territories, that defend the ecosystems and diversity are being stigmatized, are being killed, are being persecuted because they are defending their territories, should call the attention on how to meet the needs of this population so that they can continue existing and developing their cultural, their ancestral knowledge, and their harmony with nature. And this implies, Omaida and my dear colleagues, that COP15 on biodiversity and COP27 on climate change need to recognize the importance of Afro-descendant peoples in the region and their organizations, and should promote the recognition as political entities and their participation in decision-making in regards to global agenda, among other things, because of what we have pointed out. And part of this mapping exercise, together with the organizations, because there are 16 countries in the region that have our own organization, this needs to be recognized. And Afro-descendants should be given a voice in these scenarios that we just pointed out, the COP on biodiversity and the COP on climate change. Because in these territories, in these relations, this harmonious organization, Afro-descendants are making progress with our own agenda. We have an agenda to present at the COP on biodiversity and climate change. And we are preparing a coordination system of Afro-descendant peoples in this region. And we believe that the next COPs are going to be important scenarios to show this mapping, the presence that we already have, our level of organization in those 16 countries, with our own voice, with our agenda to tell decision makers and telling the countries, here we are, Afro-descendants, and we are important because of the reasons that they have presented. And you need to give us a voice. Thank you so much. And if I went over, I apologize, but I felt it was necessary. Jose Absalon, you stuck just to the time allotted. Thank you so much for your comments. I believe they are right to the point. What we're showing today is this territorial presence, and that's why there is this call to recognize the importance of Afro-descendants as an important player with their own voice in any scenario where there is discussion on climate change and conservation. This is a call that is being issued, and I repeat what the Afro-descendants and Jose Absalon was saying. Sad to say, one of our panelists from Brazil, Bico Rodriguez, who is the coordinator of the National Coordination Organization of Black rural quilombolas communities in Brazil, have had a lot of problems to connect from his community, his quilombola community. So sad to say he won't be able to participate. But we would like to take advantage and go into the questions part. We see a lot of activity in the chat, many questions regarding the political process. So what we're going to do now is go ahead with a question session and give us an opportunity to Joanna and Elias so that they can show us with the viewer information so that we can answer some of the questions that we have right here. Joanna and Elias, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Omaira. I'm going to share again my screen so that I can answer some of these questions. Some have to do with the updating frequency of the data, and I would like to clarify. We have this information that have been gathered through this information space in the territories. So the updating of this is in our hands, and especially it depends on each of the countries, the organizations in each of the countries. But there is a part that has to do with the institution, and that's we have no control over that regarding the frequency in which the institutions in each of the countries update their data. So that depends on the census. We have an update from Mexico census, or for instance, in Nicaragua, we have from 2005, Belize 2010, Ecuador 2010. So they are updating their data right now. There is diversity of data, but this is very well documented in the platform. In regards to the possibility to download data from the platform, we have the possibility to download. Maybe if there are not so many users, maybe we can look at it more in depth, but in each of the layers of information that you can see on the left with the different layers, you can click on the layer and you have the option of exporting it. You have different formats to choose from, depending on the specialization. You can do it in Excel or in geospatial formats. And there were also some questions in regards to the way that we have built the information, for instance, in the case of Brazil. And this information came from the conversation with the organizations and public information. In this case of the INCRA, that has information on the titling that has been done in Brazil, the Palmares Foundation, and they have in the municipalities that have quilombolas certifications. So these are the data that will be documented in the webpage of the observatory, which is etnoterritorios.org. With this information, you can interact. We can turn on and off different layers. For instance, some on climate change, we can zoom in, zoom out. There are different functions that this web page has. This is the first version of this year. So we're going to continue updating the data that are shown here to answer the question on how frequently we're going to update that. Well, we are still missing some categories like extractive activities, but we're going to try to do it as institutions in different countries update their data, and also when we get information from the organizations that will provide for more mapping exercises. Joanna, do you have anything to add? Yes, in regards to the question by Joan Anton, I believe that this is a good time to answer this. He asked about the possibility of having more pedagogical versions so that communities and other users can also use this information. This also happens when people don't have a lot of knowledge regarding handling the layers or the time or access to internet. So there are internet gaps in many of the territories that prevent these kind of servers from being accessed. And this is what happens sometimes. A server gets freezes, or maybe from the Garifuna or the Creole territories in Central America, in places that don't have a good connection, that's some difficulties. So maybe, Elias, would you like to stop sharing your screen? And I'm going to share my screen where we are providing some bits of information with maps, so that this will be in a format that people can use to print out, and it's easier to use. Okay, just a second. So far is in the page of the documentation center. When this information is totally finished and validated by the final reports, then you will be able to access it. This is something, a report that is being generated for each country. For instance, Belize, this populational system, the different ecosystems with the percentages associated, the protected areas, and aside from that, cartographic information that we might have about the area. And we are also associating the main challenges in regard to climate change in this case, because these mini reports have been designed thinking about the COP and the climate change, but the same thing can be done with data that are associated to biodiversity and in general with the maps that can be relevant. So each one will be covered with maps, coverage, ecosystems, and this can help overcome the access barriers for the people that can't access the server for some reason, or if it's not available, you can use these resumes, these summaries by country. We also have a question from David regarding coverage, forest coverage. I think you were asking about the total of the area that we have right now mapped. The RRI team maybe can give us a date, but in 1 or 2 days, we're going to publish the brief that contains the main results in a systematized way. I'm going to open the results to be able to answer your questions, but there we have an analysis of which are the main ecosystems that are present in this region with the totals in each of the 16 countries that were analyzed. So we can share with you that information.
Gracias, Joana. Frente al brief, ya está en el chat.
Thank you, Joanna. In relation to the brief, it's already in the chat. Francisco has just shared it. So it's certainly available for everyone. It's available in Spanish, and soon it will be available. Actually, tomorrow, the English version will be available, and afterwards in Portuguese. All right. So thank you very much. I think it's been a fabulous interaction. And as Joanna, Elias, and the rest of panelists have explained, this is a first outcome or product of a long-term process. However, we will continue working in it. This is not the end. This is just the introduction and the opening door to create greater quality information that can certainly contribute to protecting the territorial rights of Afro-descendant peoples and their role in any type of decision that has to do and that can affect their territories. So as a main actor in climate change and conservation, this clearly helps to show its importance, as all the speakers have mentioned. Now I'd like to hand the floor to Sonia Viveros. Sonia Viveros is coordinator of the Network of Afro-Latin American, Afro-Caribbean, and Diaspora Women, or the MAD network of Ecuador by its acronym in Spanish. She is Ecuadorian, also has a technological degree in systems and also in local development with gender perspective, and also has experience in Afro-descendant rights and Afro-Ecuadorian women's rights, and she is also an expert in strategic legitimacy and also for the violences, litigation of violences against or gender-based violences. And she's led different spaces in which different projects and plans have been developed or disseminated in relation to development. So Sonia will hand you the floor and she will offer a general and broad scope of what we've heard today from research, from the different interventions of the different panelists. And she is a regional leader woman. She will give us the perspective of Afro-descendant women as well. So thank you very much, Sonia, and welcome. Thank you very much, Omaira, Jose Luis. So with the permission of our ancestors, I hope that my voice in this encounter that will deliver the result of the mapping of presence, lands, and territories of Afro-descendant peoples in Latin America and the Caribbean can also reflect the voice of men and women of Afro-descendant peoples that are part of this continent for more than 500 years. Sometimes it would seem that we are invisible or that they don't acknowledge our presence, our ancestrality, our land ownership and habitat, the wetlands, the forests, the rainforests, the dry forests and valleys. All of these are also the Black bodies that without a doubt are a comprehensive part of the territories of which the guardians of memories and the guardians of the earth, the water, the flora, the fauna are us women. We walk together. To talk about territories is to talk about life. Life in which there is an infinity of opportunities and we've had to fight and defend ourselves with life itself. The people, we who contribute for the development of this tool, we feel as protagonists of this atlas of Afro-descendant lives, acknowledging sciences and the knowledges of communities is of utmost importance. Without your knowledge and all your experience, it wouldn't have been possible to have all the system of information. This mapping that the academia has helped us gather acknowledges the intellectual and material property of organizations. This collective and tri-party interaction from academia, cooperation, and Afro-descendant peoples is heritage of the communities, and it is an additional tool for the advocacy we carry out in each of our countries in the continuity of the fight for the land tenure and territorial tenure, because it is important that the legal acknowledgement is ensured as well as the protection of our territories within our communities. The path is created as we walk, as Antonio Machado, the poet, mentioned. But this path must also be walked by women, by Afro-descendant women. The ancestral leaders, guardians of those territories, those who know the secrets that maintain the ecosystems. All of these are women. And that is why we gather here to this call to action, because to be able to progress in this path, it's absolutely necessary to strengthen our organizations, associations, collectives, the groups, movements of women. It's necessary to support knowledge. We need to document it. We need to strengthen capabilities to be able to sustain our agendas and claim for our rights. Many times it has been said in this session, we must be present in those initiatives, in those international scenarios. The next one will be the COP. We need to be present. We need to deliver our and raise our voices. I can't leave without mentioning and raising my voice, without acknowledging those who were part of this great research. I want to thank the trust of all my colleagues, of the leaders of organizations from Chile, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Mexico, Paraguay, Brazil, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, of Costa Rica, Belize, Panama, and of my dear Ecuador, with whom we really drove international Afro-descendant agendas even before Durban. So I have to do this now as well and recognize and acknowledge those leaders that have already passed and are part of our ancestors. And we need to also say to the PNC, thank you for summoning us. RRI, thank you so much for believing so much in this initiative, which is a result of workshops that were carried out in over 33 years ago, in which you, PCR, and the RRI joined forces to think about this tool, and now we have it. It is a reality. We have a tool that displays territories and it reveals the situation of each of these territories. We must also acknowledge the great value, the great contribution that the University Javeriana makes to be able to display in these maps and through this mapping all the memory of those men and women from communities. We spent hours and hours in collecting data, in finding and searching in a general map of our country where that dot is specifically located for Afro-descendant peoples. Those dots that in the atlas of Afro-descendant peoples, as I like to call it, might seem a minor topic. However, with climate change, we must therefore rethink on advocating to really ensure the livelihoods of our communities. That's why this Atlas of Afro-descendant peoples highlights the fact that this is a tool for our advocacy work. It is just one of those outcomes that surely will help to continue driving and ensuring the visibility of those lands and territories of Afro-descendant peoples in our different countries. I'd also like to call and acknowledge all the colleagues that have been part of this investigation. I'd also like to acknowledge all colleagues who have joined this process and who will continue disseminating this presentation, because there's still lots to do, there's lots to identify, and we still need to claim for much more. And at the moment that this map is much more disseminated within our organizations, we need to mobilize it and create advocacy work in each of our governments. So I'll hand the floor again back to you with the favor of our ancestors. Omaira, thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Sonia. Qué palabras tan lindas.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you for your beautiful and moving words. I think you've really summarized not only the fact that these are technical tools, but also that the fact that these are tools that respond for the fight for human life, for acknowledgement, and for the possibility of living a dignified life. So thank you for your words. All right, we see that there's great activity in the chat, and we don't want to miss the opportunity to reply to some of the questions that you've shared. And I want to perhaps address a question that perhaps Sonia and other panelists can reply to. There's a question that states, what's next now among the Afro-descendant leaders that have participated in this process to continue driving this effort within the region through union, through articulation? So what are the next steps? If you could perhaps please reply. I'll hand the floor initially to Jose Luis. We have Jose Absalon, Jose Gregoria, and Sonia. We'd like to ask you, what is the following step? What does this first effort mean, and where do you want to drive it to now? Jose Luis? Yes, so perhaps I'd like to start, but Omaira, before this, I'd like to mention that Carlos Rosero, one of our colleagues who's also joined this effort, is here present. And so that perhaps we can have his intervention first. Hello, Carlos Rosero. It's a pleasure to have you with us. The interpreter apologizes. I am not getting clear audio. Hello, brothers, sisters. Hello, Omaira. Hello, Omaira. How are you? I'm very well, thank you very much. I'm very glad and very thankful to be able to have you in this process. We'll hand you the floor. So there's a question, which is, what is the next step? What is the new direction after this mapping process? So where's the moving heading towards? Do we want your answer? Thank you. All right, colleagues, thank you very much. And thank you for this effort and for the meeting that you've been carrying out. For us, mapping the territories certainly allows us to collect information that is actually not only important, but strategic, because the territory is very much associated to what we are in this continent. And it grants us space to build ourselves in cultural terms, and it has served certainly as a possibility to build our dreams, even though these are some in very difficult situations, such as the ones that you are all very much familiarized with and perhaps live at firsthand. So what is next? I think in all Latin America, the dispute for territories of Afro-descendant peoples is something that is a pending topic. Therefore, mapping for us is a weapon for us to be able to defend our territorial rights and environmental rights. For example, we are now in the northern Cauca department of Colombia in a conflict situation, territorial conflict situation, with business people that are fully dedicated to sugarcane production, with also indigenous communities, peasants communities that certainly highlight the defense work of this territory and the importance of this as a space of livelihoods. And a colleague who's also a historian is also working on the memory as a topic related to this, because the territory is not only an element that ensures livelihoods, but also an element that defines who we are, what we seek, what we dream of. So at least for the case of Colombia, mapping serves us to be able to have our bets much more clear, especially now in the moment that we are, and in the consolidation of the National Development Plan of our current government, and to be able to enshrine there a portion of all these matters, and to be able to advance in a clearer way, to really constitute reservoirs and to protect them as part of the patrimony of our communities and the species that are also very much linked to who we are and what we are. So this is not just a simple task that we do in order to just gather more information. This is a task that is very much related to the exercise of politics from a community perspective, but also from the perspective of trying to advocate and have impact on public policies and try to resolve specific problems and issues such as, for example, land tenure and entitlement, the recovery of lands that our communities have lost, and to be able to guide in a better way participation processes and specifically countries where, for example, there's an acknowledgement of previous consultation as a fundamental right for communities. And so mapping is a tool that serves us to show where we are or where we were and how we lost territories. And in this way, we can sustain our dreams, and this can certainly inspire us to continue. Obviously, I think that territorial topics are controversial and transcendental around the world. We're here talking about energy transition that is very much related, for example, to climate crisis and the possibility of ensuring our livelihoods, and also how we can contribute to this very important topic in the development model and the attitude or the position we assume as peoples and Afro-descendant peoples in order to also ensure our livelihoods and as humankind, as we share this condition with all living human beings. So I think, of course, this work has a practical perspective and a political perspective that is of utmost importance. So this is certainly a tool that allows us to continue with this endeavor for us to be acknowledged. And I would just say in closing that, well, here, for the first time in Colombia, we've achieved to include within the national government plan historical reparation as a consequence of slavery. There are many communities, such as, for example, the community of our VP, Francia Marquez, in the Northern Cauca department. And I just like to highlight that territory for this community and the acknowledgement of territorial rights is part of that historical and collective repairment due to the suffering that our community suffered during many, many years. And also for the contribution that we've done to our nations to be developed to the point that they are currently. We've contributed, we've helped, and a way to compensate us as a community is through historical repairment. So thank you very much for this opportunity, although it was a bit pressured, and greetings on behalf of Francia RVP, and we are there with you in the endeavors, not only for our country, but we're absolutely convinced that this will also serve to open greater doors and greater acknowledgement and implementation of the rights of our peoples in other locations of the continent or even the world. So we assume this from a local perspective with this huge responsibility that you all are also leading. Thank you. Let's keep working. Thank you very much, Carlos, especially for expressing that great interest of working in solidarity from Colombia towards the other countries of the region and from other countries towards Colombia in the continuity of strengthening this process that you've been developing for so long. So it's an honor to have you here with us. Thank you for your words. So now I'd like to give the last chance before we close this session. I'd like to give a chance to the panels we had with us, Gregoria, Jose Absalon, Jose Luis, Osvaldo. Could you please share from your own perspectives, what are the next steps? After all this collective efforts, what are the next steps from the different countries so that you can position as actors, leading actors to defend your territorial rights and to have a stronger articulation at a regional level? So Jose Absalon, are you there?
Creo que no tenemos a José Absalón, entonces le daría
I believe that we don't have Jose Absalon, so I would like to invite Gregoria, if you're there. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so you can get started and then we'll go on to Gregoria. Thank you, Mayra. No, I was just commenting that I'm very excited with this work, with this that we have done, and also with this meeting. I believe that what's coming is strengthening the coordination of the organizations of Afro-descendant peoples. And this coordination that will allow us or to continue or finish consolidating our agenda as Afro-descendants so that it can be discussed in all the regional and global instances that are related to this topic. And the main thing in this agenda is to be recognized as political subjects. So we need to consolidate our organization in a region and finish our agenda, finish defining our agenda, and see if before the end of the year we can have an in-person meeting, at least with the members of these 16 countries that are in this coordination, so that we can have this level of organization that we need and move forward this agenda. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jose Absalon. Now I would like to give the floor to Gregoria for her closing words. Well, again, I want to thank you for the opportunity. As my colleague, I'm very excited to see so many consultations, so many questions in the chat, and congratulations because of this joint work that we have done. There was a specific question regarding what are the strategies that can be implemented in order to have the support or to be able to have better advocacy with the states. So we are doing a lot of work in a lot of advocacy. We have signed with 3 pre-presidential candidates some commitments, some campaign commitments, and to see some specific actions that they can implement once they get elected. So we have been working from different scenarios with the Commission, in the legislative power with other institutions, like a special office that we have here, which is the Special Prosecutor Office for Ethnic Groups, and that they are supporting the work that we do in the grassroots communities. So we are part of that, and part of this support that are given or associations on a local level so that they can see some results in regard to the protection of the territories. That would be an answer to the question that I was asked directly. And regarding what is the next step, well, I believe that the meeting that we had in Ecuador was very, very important as well, to see this possibility that Jose was mentioning, to continue working together on a roadmap that will allow us to see what is the common interest of seeing our peoples in better conditions. So we have to strengthen all the institutions in our countries so that we'll be able to do a joint effort, and so that the states will be that we are doing joint actions, and among them this effort that you have done in order to have this data, because sometimes you say, well, you don't even know how many hectares have already been titled in your country. Now we have this information, and as a result of this important effort that has been done with you, we're going to have even more arguments to show that we are doing an organized and professional work. Something that is showing that we can also be thinking people, because in our states, in our countries, we are seen as people that don't have this capacity, but now we have shown that it is possible and that we can do it. So we need to continue working and working together so that we can see our peoples in better conditions. Thank you again for allowing us to be part of this meeting. Thank you so much, Gregoria. And now I would like to give the floor to Osvaldo for his last words for the closing. Thank you, Omaira. I believe that we have 2 perspectives here, or 2 pathways. An internal pathway, how do we develop or how do we disseminate all this work within our communities? Because the building of the agenda doesn't have to be from the top down, but it needs to be developed from the bottom up. So first of all, we have to disseminate all this work within our communities. And I believe that we should be able to develop a pilot in each of the countries. First of all, to disseminate the knowledge regarding the progress that has been made and how this can be implemented. And on a global or international level, we need to be consolidated as a vanguard group and work on this in an organized way, building this agenda like Jose Absalom was saying. But this agenda needs to take a lot of its elements from what our communities want. So I believe that if we do these two things, we will be able to have a robust program that can be made available both on a national level and on an international level. Because if we just work on the international issues, many times our countries do not implement international mandates, so we need to have a strong advocacy on a local level so that our agenda will be paid attention to. So there is a lot to do, but I believe that with tenacity and with a lot of willpower, we'll be able to accomplish that. I really want to thank RRI, PCN, and all our colleagues that have been supporting us during this process. And I'm very happy to be able to contribute to this. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Osvaldo.
Thank you so much, Osvaldo.
Tenemos un minuto de
We
cierre.
have 1 minute left.
José Luis,
I would like to invite Jose Luis,
palabras, y de ahí yo hago el cierre.
just some last words, and then I will do the final closing. Well, Omaira, I agree with the words from all my colleagues that have talked before me. I believe that this is a real joy for us. We have made progress in regards of a reading, a vision of Black peoples in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in regards to what is missing, we need to continue with the strengthening of the Black peoples. And this process means to introduce other aspects that maybe were not taken care in the study, and maybe also other countries that because of the time or other concerns were not included in the study. We believe, on the other hand, that what has been done by you, RRI, and by us, PCN, has contributed and should contribute to making progress along this path. We need to continue having these conversations. We need to continue feeding all this information that we have compiled. And like Osvaldo says, we need to continue working with the communities in such a way that this information will be valid. So thank you so much to all of you. As PCN, we are very happy to have these results just as you are. And we believe that what is coming is a commitment on the part of all of us and that there is work for us. Thank you so much, Omaira, and thank you to all of you.
Muchas gracias, José Luis.
Thank you so much, Jose Luis. And now I would like to invite Sonia, and while she speaks, I would like to ask Francisco to write in the chat the email of Jose Luis, Joanna, and myself, because people are asking who they should contact. So Sonia, we would like to have your beautiful words as a closing. What's coming? This study adds to our proposal of a change theory. I'm talking in the name of Afro-Latin America, Afro-Caribbean, and diaspora women. In the name of the 20 countries that are part of the network. And our charter says that we want to have food sovereignty, and to accomplish that, we need the territories. These will be included in the results of our observatory of public policy, and also will also be part of the meeting that in mid-November our network will have in Brazil. No doubt we will position our Quito Declaration, and we will also put this map in order to own it and make it part of our advocacy in regards to particular topics of Black women. Thank you, Omaira. Thank you so much, Sonia. So on my part, I'm also very happy. I don't know how to express my happiness seeing that this process and the big step that we have taken with this collective effort. And now we have this tool that is really going to help us in the future. Please feel happy to contact us. I believe that they are adding to the chat my email and Joan of Jose Luis and Joan Herrera. And this way we can connect with the rest of the organization. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for believing that this was possible. And we hope that through this space, we will be able to get more allies and include more people from the Afro-descendants communities and continue building this in the future. Thank you so much. See you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. See you soon. A big hug. Lots of hearts to you all. Oh, we didn't take a picture, Mayra. Oh, that's true, the photo. Oh, we need a picture. How do you take a picture here? Well, I'm not good for pictures, but
Okay.
oh, gallery right here. Francisco, the ones that know about this. Well, you need to turn on your cameras. Well, a big hug. Okay, Osvaldo, I'm going to call you in 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, thank you so much for everything. We have only the speakers right here? No, the webinar is still open. There are 74 participants. Okay, let's go up and then we can meet somewhere else because this is going to be closed. Thank you so much.